So I am thrilled and happy to be introducing Timothy L. Tramble Sr. Tim, I want to congratulate you on completing today your first month as president and CEO of the St. Luke's Foundation. At St. Luke's, Tim leads the organization in pursuing health equity in the neighborhoods supported by the foundation and throughout Cuyahoga County. Tim is a highly respected community and civic leader. Prior to his appointment at St. Luke's, he previously led Burton Bell Carr Development Incorporated, which is the community development organization for Cleveland's Central, Kinsman, Buckeye Shaker Square, and Buckeye Wood Hill neighborhoods. His innovative work there did receive national recognition. Tim is a graduate of the Leadership Cleveland class of 2010. I know you have lots of fans supporting you today from your LC class from Burton Bell Carr and also from the St. Luke's Foundation. In a departing letter to the community stakeholders and partners of Burton Bell Carr, Tim offered this call to action. Now is not the time to fall into the traditional patterns of pointing the finger for what others have done to create and perpetuate the inequalities within our built environment. Rather, it is time that each of us look within ourselves to be at least a small part of the change that is needed to foster a more just and shared prosperity for future generations. I think that is a wonderful message, and it is one that Tim role models for us every day. Tim has given of himself to our community his entire career, and his service as a member of the monitoring team is no exception. The Cleveland Police Monitoring Team oversees, on behalf of a federal judge, the day-to-day efforts of the City of Cleveland and the Cleveland Division of Police toward complying with the reforms required by the consent decree. Tim's work as a monitor is helping create a culture where policing in Cleveland is effective, safe, constitutional, and consistent with the values of our diverse communities. Tim, thank you for being here. Glad you can spend some of your time with us.
Thank you very much for having me. Truly appreciate the warm words and truly appreciate what you guys are doing at the Leadership Cleveland, at the Leadership Center. Please continue the good work that you're doing. I am going to talk about my role as a Cleveland police monitor, and I am going to first start by giving you some history and background about the consent decree at which we are monitoring, and give you some background about who we are and who we are not, and our roles and responsibilities, and some of the successes that we've had, some of the challenges that we're going through. I'm going to try to zip through that in about 10 minutes and then turn it over to you all to ask questions. I'm going to assume that most of you don't know a whole lot. So if you do know a lot, then I apologize, because this is going to be kind of an elementary outline for you. But what I find in most cases is that most people don't know a lot about the Cleveland monitoring team and don't know a lot about our role, and sometimes get us confused with the Cleveland Police Commission. And so I want to make those clarifications. So how we got started in 2013, Mayor Frank Jackson called upon the Department of Justice to do an investigation. And I think everyone knows it's hard to believe that that was in November of 2012. In November of 2012, the 137 shots, the killing of Timothy Russell and Melissa Williams, along with a few other things that happened during that time, gave the mayor pause to reach out to the Department of Justice and ask if they can do an evaluation of the Cleveland Police Department to determine if the practices of, in particularly the area of use of force, was appropriate. In 2014, the Department of Justice completed its finding. I'm sorry, in 2013, in 2014, that's correct. It completed its finding, and it determined that there was reasonable cause to assume that the City of Cleveland Department, the City of Cleveland Division of Police, had a pattern of practicing excessive use of force, and entered into negotiation with the city of Cleveland to correct that. What ended up happening is that there were a series of meetings, a series of conversations, not just with the Division of Police, but with community members, city council, community advocates. And what ended up happening is, and we have to give respect to the advocates that really advocated for further and more than just change around the use of force policy, but advocacy around many different areas, right? And in that investigation, not just the use of force policy was determined to be deficient, but many areas of policing were determined to be deficient. So as a result of that, there is a 400, and I believe it's 403 paragraphs of the consent decree, right? And about 85 of them are dedicated to use of force. So it's not just use of force policy, but it's also use of force investigation, and it's also a use of force review board that, you know, is another layer on top of that. There is another layer with the Inspector General. So there are many layers of accountability and monitoring around how effective and how appropriate the use of force is within the city of Cleveland. There are three categories of use of force, or three tiers, I should say. The first tier is a tier that does not cause injury. The second tier is the tier that does cause injury, but doesn't include any blows to the head. And the third is the tier that does cause hospitalization, that does cause hospitalization, and up to the use of deadly force, right? And so through this process, one of the first things that had to be done was for the city of Cleveland to establish arguably, if you talk to those who are on the police commission, they would say that they're not a civilian oversight mechanism of the police, because they are accountable to the city of Cleveland. In particular, they are accountable to the mayor's office. They prefer to be an independent oversight committee. But that oversight committee was established, and one of the first things that happened was that they were established in September of 2015. They are a group of 13, and 10 of them are civilians from all walks of life. And the consent decree actually outlines the areas at which each individual, or at least they need to touch. It's 8 areas. Individuals that are in youth services, individuals who deal with the homeless, individuals who are of faith-based. It runs the gamut for what the composition of the police commission needs to be. But that is a group of 10 civilians, along with 3 police officers who are connected to the 3 unions of police. One is the Black Shields, the other is the Cleveland Patrolmen's Association, and the Fraternal Order of Police. So that body is the body that's really responsible for informing policy as policies are created. And it's been, again, in establishment since September of 2015. The monitoring team was the second kind of major accomplishment of the consent decree and requirement of the consent decree. And we were formed in October of 2015. And basically the monitor's responsibility is to review, assess, and report the progress of the consent decree, right? So many people think that we are an enforcement arm, and one of the things that I like to give clarity to is that, unfortunately, We are not an enforcement arm. The power that we have is the power of our pen. And so what we do is we do semi-annual reports where nearing the completion of our 8th semi-annual report. They're very comprehensive reports, and they run the gamut of every single, the reporting outlines the progress of every single paragraph within the consent decree. So they're very comprehensive reports. Those reports can be found on the website of the Cleveland Police Monitor. The Cleveland Police Monitor website is www.clevelandpolicemonitor.net or .com. Either one, you'll land at the Cleveland Police Monitor page. And along with those semi-annual reports, we have done numerous other reports. We've done community surveys. We've done officer focused surveys, because it's important to understand what officers think they need in order to do their job. And so once those 3 things were established, then the work began really with the police department. And the police department, there have been a lot of things that had to be reformed, starting with bias-free policing. I believe that was the first thing after revamping the mission statement. So there's a new bias-free policing policy. There's a new, obviously, use of force policy. There's a new policy around crisis intervention. I'm sure everyone probably remember the Tanisha Anderson situation, a tragic situation where she had schizophrenia and was bipolar, and her family called because she was going through an episode and wanted her to go to the hospital. And unfortunately, the police who arrived were not, I would say, they were not educated or not trained on how to deal with mental illness. And the tragedy from that is that she ended up passing away by the injuries inflicted upon her by the police. And so, and tragically, I think that happened just a day before Tamir Rice's situation, right? So, you know, those are some of the critical major things within the consent decree. There are many other things that have been worked on. The body-worn cameras was one of the first sort of equipment things that was addressed. When the body-worn cameras was instituted, the complaints of the police department went down by like 60-something%, right? We have the new search and seizure policy as well. We have new training policies and new trainings around the crisis intervention, new trainings around the use of force. We have what is called a community and problem-oriented policing plan, and there's training around that. You know, how do you engage community in a way that makes community feel that you are a partner in public safety and not a threat in public safety. So I'll tell you, I'm proud to say that I had a lot to do with that part of it. Most of this stuff, we have, the monitoring team is comprised of about 16, we fluctuate, I think we went as high as 19, but about 16 subject matter experts in law enforcement. I mean, the individuals that I work with are individuals that you see on CNN as correspondence. I, sort of text back and forth with the team, joking about the experts that we have who give commentary on CNN and so forth. So very intelligent, very mindful, very educated around best police practices within our team. We have 4 individuals who are local, and I'm one of those 4 individuals. And most of my work is around the work around community and community and problem-oriented policing, right? There's an area of the consent decree that deals with community engagement, and that deals with um, community having oversight and having a connection with the districts. Those are the district policing committees. They actually existed in a different form before the consent decree, but the consent decree, sort of established policies so that, individuals could have more of a stake in the decision making around the tactics and the strategies on the district level. I feel like, I can go on and on and on talking about the various aspects of the consent decree, but I hope that gave you a good synopsis of everything that we do as monitors. Again, the CPC, what people generally confuse us with, they are responsible for engaging community and the dialogue around what policy, what items should be incorporated into the formation of policies as they are created. And our role, again, is more of a observer of the process and a reporter, independent. We are an agent of the court. We report to Judge Solomon Oliver, so we don't report to the city of Cleveland. We're like the one entity that isn't beholden to the city of Cleveland. We are an agent of the court, Judge Solomon Oliver, who is the Chief Justice of the Northern District of the United States. So with that, I'm going to conclude and open the floor for questions.
Thank you, Tim. Really appreciate it. We do have some questions rolling in. We'll get to as many as possible. But starting here, I've heard Chief Williams describe the consent decree as a process that will help develop a framework that can help change culture. And certainly with your community development work, you are well attuned to what that process looks like, and changing culture can be a slow process. Are there some changes that you've seen within the culture through those actionable items that you've talked about that are encouraging to you, they kind of give you hope moving forward?
Yeah, so I think people that know me, they know I'm very honest in certain questions. I have to be very tactful with how I answer questions, because there's an appropriateness to my role in this space, and it's not to give my personal opinions, but to be objective as a monitor. So with that caveat, I would say that there have been, as I've outlined, numerous policies that give promise for changing cultures. I will quote James Comey when he was the director of the Department of Justice. James Comey spoke to the perspective that culture, you cannot change culture with training, right? That training alone would not change culture, right? And when I heard that, and that was very early when he came to the city of Cleveland, that was very early on. And when I heard that, I said, wow, like if this person, who's a significant figure in law enforcement in the country feels that way, then the area that we really need to focus on is the area of making sure that the new officers that we bring on to the force are officers that have a sensitivity and that have a culture for truly engaging community as partners in public safety, right? So I do think that there are sort of institutional and sort of ingrained philosophies that won't be responsive to any type of changes systematically, won't adhere to or fall in line with a new direction, but ultimately, hopefully we can weed those out and we can bring other individuals on who have a commitment to constitutional policing, right? So yeah, that's my answer to that.
Great, thanks. And that addresses a little bit of Laura asked a question about the recruitment and some of the efforts and initiatives there. There's a question, has there been a notable decrease in the number of incidents since the adoption of the consent decree? And within any of the tracking, is that, is the tracking done by race to see if, if there's a notable decrease in that statistic as well?
Yes. So, man, there are powerful statistics around around stops, searches, and seizures, and so forth. And all of the statistics sort of skew to a disproportionate amount of African Americans being stopped, indicted, prosecuted. All of the statistics bear out that there is there is an unfairness in our system. But the statistic that is really valuable to us is the statistic of the number of complaints that are received by the Department of the Office of Professional Standards. And the Office of Professional Standards is the office that take in citizen complaints. And I think that is an area that, if anyone knows about, sort of a very bad or weak area of this reform process, it has been the Office of Professional Standards. And I should say that it's weak because of where it started. I mean, it was absolutely, I guess just saying, incompetent and, not doing its job. The office had backlogs, over a year-long backlogs of investigations that had never taken place before the consent decree. Many of my colleagues on the monitoring team have spent endless hours working with the city of Cleveland to get that office in order. And there has been significant progress, but when you are 10 miles behind, just because you've caught up to be only 2 miles behind doesn't make it good. And so I certainly won't paint a good picture of where the office is today. I will say that it has a great leader in Roger Smith, who became the administrator of the office in 2018. And the city has equipped it with more staff. I think it has increased staff by maybe 40%. So there is a concerted effort to make that work better. But ultimately, with lower complaints, that's a good thing for, it's a good indicator that something is better. Now, again, I think I mentioned that when we instituted the body-worn cameras, we had complaints decrease, we had use of force decrease, right? Use of force decreased significantly. Now, some would say that it's because people saw that they were being recorded, and others would say it's because cops knew that they were being recorded. So regardless, the body-worn cameras has been worth their weight in gold, and that is something that we certainly should make sure that we continue to have. And as we all know, that for I would say generations, there have been complaints around police brutality that really only came to light and continue to come to light because of video. Like, video has been a game changer, that these things are real, right? And in many cases in the past, it was the word of an officer against a word of a civilian, and the word of an officer in court always ruled, right? So yeah, it's good that we have those new technology that we can use. It has been truly helpful. But we also see, I do want to, say that, there are instances, and you've even seen it on TV, where, there are cops, I've seen, and I've been a part of, I've witnessed, I've sat in on the training around community and problem-oriented policing, and they've shown on TV some of that actually in practice, right? Where a police officer gets called to a situation where kids are playing basketball, and the officers engage in the basketball game and start playing basketball with them. The truth of the matter is that that's a part of the training. That's actually a part of the training. So when I saw Cleveland police officers doing it and it making the news, it was very interesting to me. Like, well, they're literally doing what an example of community and problem-oriented policing. That's an example in their training.
That's great. This is a great leadership question. Can you speak to some of the barriers to policy formation that have come up and that you've successfully overcome? And then the leadership element is that, what strategies have been helpful in overcoming any barriers that you've faced?
Yeah, barriers. Well, I think I've alluded to it. There is, I don't want to digress too much. I don't want to, sort of, to give an analogy, but I'm thinking of an analogy that would speak to, the difficulty around changing a system. Like when a system has sort of ingrained, let's just say, unfairness, ingrained positions of power to influence outcomes for a particular group that's interest. It's very tough to overcome that. It's very tough. I'm surprised no one has asked about, the arbitration process, right, and the collective bargaining. Those systems and those processes have been very difficult to maneuver around, right? And there have been some successes at maneuvering around them, but they still exist. Those structures still exist. We haven't broken those structures fully. And as you guys know, that there's more, like, we're just dealing with the police. Like that's all the monitoring team is dealing with, is with the police. And I'm sure many of you have listened to the podcast Serial, right? And you understand that, man, the justice part of this, the court system part of this, the prosecution part of this, all of it have this ingrained historical system of the product being favoring to people in power. So and the person not in power, the individual who come in contact with law enforcement, the individual that come into contact and have to deal with the criminal justice system. I mean, there are individual stories every day that just break your heart about, there was a story about a individual that was unfairly prosecuted, and because he didn't, the bond was so high, and he spent 5 months in jail, and he had a medical condition. I mean, the stories that you hear are just tragic. And if his income was different, and the situation is that, a different person could get a totally different sentence, or not even have a bond, right? And there's like no rhyme or reason why one person would have a bond and one person won't. It's just subject to the the decision of the judge. And so there are a lot of things within our criminal justice system that we need to work out and we need to figure out. And there are many individuals who are strong advocates of criminal justice change. And we all need to continue to pound the pavement for that, because let's just say we do everything that we need to do. And I say we, I'm not just speaking of the monitoring team, because this is going to take the city of Cleveland. It has taken the city of Cleveland. It has taken the community. It has taken the Cleveland Police Commission. And it has taken, basically the entire community to see change in the division of police. And it's going to take the entire community to see change in those areas as well.
Great. Thanks, Tim. And actually, I was going to go over a couple of minutes with a follow-up question, but you addressed it right there, that this is work, the scope of which is beyond the monitoring team and does involve all of us. Realize this is a very complicated and entrenched issue, and don't want to shortchange the conversation. And there were a couple other questions we didn't get to, but really appreciate your time and certainly your work with this process. It's been a great conversation.